Our goal here is to look at the effect of one of the main Enlightenment revolutions, which is to say, we're looking at the rise of Napoleon in the context of how does a nation react to a full-scale revolution that tries to espouse different ideals. Now, the National Convention, remember, the National Assembly had become the National Convention. France has just gone through this reign of terror. The National Convention began to reassert itself and created a new constitution that limited the number of voters and included separation of powers. They placed a five-man directory in charge as the new executive branch, but this directory was continually plagued with problems. They were consistently facing threats, not only from the Jacobins, who have just been forced from power during the Reign of Terror, but also from monarchists who want to see a return to the king and queen. Meanwhile, the Directory relied on military conquest to attempt to stimulate the economy, as men would continually fight and plunder, and this was seen as viable. Rome tells us that it's not exactly sustainable, but it was viewed as viable for the time being. The man on screen, Napoleon Bonaparte, was a young general who enjoyed numerous victories, such as the seizure of northern Italy from the Austrians. In 1799, Napoleon and two other members of the Directory plotted to overthrow the current government, and it happened pretty easily. So that's where the coup d'etat comes into play. Napoleon is often referred to as an enlightened despot. He's known for his military prowess, and we're not necessarily going to get into his specific accomplishments on the battlefield. But the question remains, why is this man who crowned himself Holy Roman Emperor, why is he an enlightened despot? He appeared to have fulfilled the hopes of the 18th century philosophies with his policies. Now, he stabilized the finances of his nation through the creation of a Bank of France. And he even enforced the metric system of weights and measures for trade and accounting. And he used the new Napoleonic Code to enforce the legal equality of all French citizens. Now, jurists would enhance the code by using general principles rather than inherited custom law, so they could create the new system of civil laws. Interestingly enough, the Napoleonic Code was the basis of the legal system in French colonies throughout the world and was highly influential in places like Mexico. Once they were able to implement successful reforms in even the 1950s and 1960s, African nations like Mali and Senegal used this code as the template for their legal systems. So Napoleon's reforms did have lasting influence. Now, all of this with seeds of nationalism. This goes along with the idea that nobles were tied by marriage to aristocrats from other countries, while peasants were tied to their villages and provincial communities. The conscription that began under the Reign of Terror amplified under Napoleon, and these soldiers returned to their villages having seen the world, and they were full of pride as French soldiers saw themselves as French citizens rather than subjects of the king. Napoleon actually fed on this and promised his soldiers glory rather than liberty. Now, nationalism also went hand in hand with military success abroad. Napoleon gave up trying to invade England after his navy was defeated at Trafalgar in 1805. But you can see, on the continent, his forces were unstoppable. His army was commanded by officers chosen for their military talents rather than hereditary connections, very similar to what Genghis Khan did with the Mongols. And as you can see on the map, they swept through Iberia and Italy. They controlled the Netherlands, Poland, the western portion of what's now Germany, and they defeated the Austrians and Prussians. And his actions influenced nationalism all across Europe. The German people treated him as a bearer of liberty and equality when his army crossed the Rhine. But unfortunately, they acted more like occupiers than liberators, so the people were disappointed. And at this time, the German people were bound together by a common language and culture, but were politically fragmented. Similar sentiments occurred on the Italian peninsula, where the people began to assert this common Italian identity. And as far away as Egypt, Napoleon's 1798 invasion destroyed the status quo and set the stage for a more powerful Egyptian state. So, why do we address Napoleon? Well, he carries out many Enlightenment ideals and helps sow the foundations of rising tides of European nationalism in the 1800s.